Så vores næste taler og sidste taler inden vi slår blikst og Arik de afrunder, så er det igen fra Canada, hvor vi kan byde velkommen til Alex Forrest, som siden 1989 har været brandmand ved Winnipeg Fire Department, som samtidig også har rang løjtnant og været 17 år været formand for United Firefighters i Holland, blandt mere. Samtidig så er Alex, han er også samtidig juristadvokat med speciale i arbejdsret og blandt flere ting også observatør ved International Agency for Research on Cancer ved WHO. Så vi glæder os til at høre dit indlæg, Alex. Værsgo.
This is a great honor for me. I have traveled all around the world. I've been to over 20 countries, and I can say that this is a great honor for me. This is the second time that I've been to Copenhagen and Denmark, and it's been a great honor for me to have a conversation with Police Alarm Blitz on previous cases. And I think that's led to what we have here today, and I can just tell from the amount of people here, the issue is catching on, and I think that's something that's very important. And I just want to thank yourself, Ms. Blix, the chairperson, and the speaker for the health portfolio within Denmark, and as well Tommy Kjær and his team from Cancer Denmark. I just want to thank you for everything that you've done as well. I think it's moving in the right direction, and I look forward to the day. Oh, sorry. And I look forward to the day when I come back to Denmark and I see that the legislation is passed. My name is Alex Forrest. I'm a firefighter first. I'm also a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for 20 years. I specialize in workers' compensation, labor law issues, and legislative drafting. I'm also a fire officer in Winnipeg. Winnipeg is a large city of approximately 1 million people within Canada. I'm also the International Association of Firefighters national rep for firefighters across Canada, representing 25,000 people. And I'm part of the International Association of Firefighters, which is the largest union in the world for firefighters at over 300,000 members. One of the things that I've been doing for close to 15 years now is advocating the need for proper legislation that assists firefighters to get compensation when they get occupational cancer. One of the tragic ironies of our job is that firefighters love what they do. But firefighters, many of them do not realize the danger that they put themselves in every single time they go into a fire. Every single time they go into a fire, they will be exposed to cancer-causing agents, and we do not have the protective equipment that's going to be able to protect us. There's no longer a debate. Study after study shows a connection between firefighting and occupational cancer. Tommy had mentioned 50 studies. Actually, there's probably closer to 100 studies that have went on since the 1980s to the present day, detailing with firefighting and cancer. And this is one thing that this is doing, this studies, is that every single time you have a study, it's like a big puzzle. And every study completes that puzzle. And that puzzle is a very scary picture of firefighters dying of cancer and firefighters needing assistance from governmental agencies. And it's getting worse. Why? There's plastics and the increased use in society, building materials, household items all around the world. China is the main producer and supplier of items, everything from electronics to household furniture to every aspect. If you look at your translator and you turn it around, it says made in China. So it doesn't matter whether you're from Denmark or from any part of Europe, Australia, Canada, United States, we are a plastic society. And what this is doing is this creating a more toxic element for firefighters. And this has been acknowledged by the World Health Organization, because I've had the opportunity to be part as an observer within the IARC organization, which is the #1 organization in the world that gives advice to governments around the world on issues related to cancer. How do we deal with these issues? What I'm going to be talking about today is I'm going to be talking about Canada, United States, Australia. Tommy has already talked about Europe, but Europe is where Australia was 2 years ago and where Canada was in 2002. And I'm speaking as a firefighter, and I've seen hundreds of my brothers and sisters succumb to occupational cancer from around the world. And unfortunately, the majority of those firefighters do not get recognized as an occupational injury and subsequent death. And what that does is that those firefighters basically do not receive any type of compensation or support from the governments. The history, one thing about it is when I first started as a firefighter, it's exactly what you heard the previous discussions were, is firefighters are very healthy. Firefighters enter the fire service, they're in the top 10 percentile of physical fitness. They are at the utmost. They have screening processes. They have the least amount of cancer compared to society. Matter of fact, studies show that when firefighters join the fire department or fire organization, they have anywhere from 20 to 30% less chance of getting cancer than the general population because they're so fit. But what we find is that within 5 years, there's upwards of a doubling of risk for that firefighter because of their exposures to occupational cancers. In the 1990s, USA and Canada had a large number of young firefighters dying of cancers. All were previously healthy. They had no family history of cancer. But there was almost an epidemic in North America, and there was some early science that came out. There was because of the number of firefighters in Canada that were dying of occupational cancer, there was a study done in 1992. It was a very awkward study at that time, but they recognized that there were certain cancers that was connected with firefighting. At this time as well, there was also 2 studies, one out of Stockholm and one out of Paris. And both these studies found conclusive links to cancer and firefighting. The ironic thing is, when you read these early studies, all of these scientists had no input from firefighters during the study. So these studies, these scientists would say, we know that there's an increase of cancer within firefighters in Canada, in Stockholm, in Paris, but we can't figure out why this is. Is it a lifestyle thing? And quite frankly, throughout these studies, it doesn't even talk about the exposures that we have. And that shows the lack of knowledge that the scientific community really had at that time, knowing about our job. Because I can tell you, as firefighters, we knew something was up. Because you could not be a firefighter that worked a certain number of years in any fire department in the world without knowing that a large number of the people that you started with have died of cancer. So we knew that as an organization, so we became active. And that's when I came in the 1990s. And I became an advocate, not only for Canada, but also United States, Australia, and now Europe. Firefighters were dying at such an alarming rate because we were keeping track. And I applaud the fact that Finland is keeping track of these registries, because it's important to do that, because that's one piece of the puzzle in regards to gaining legislation. Because that is evidence to show that firefighters are dying of cancer. But because of the workers' compensation systems, it's not going to result in compensation being granted to that firefighter. And I'll explain why in a second. Studies start to get more sophisticated. Starting in just before 2002, we had the Giudotti report to the Workers' Compensation Board of Manitoba saying that, yes, we now know there is a select number of cancers associated with occupational firefighters. We had the Forrest out of Philadelphia, Demers, the Nordic studies that were coming out. But firefighters were not getting support. USA also knew this was going on. So at the same time that Canada was moving towards their legislation, the United States was dealing with it in a different way. They were saying that firefighters should not be financially challenged if they get occupational cancer, because the jurisdictions within the United States, there's upwards of 40 jurisdictions, had said that they should not lose pension or health care benefits. But there is no consistency in coverage in the United States. It wasn't until 2002 in Manitoba. Manitoba is a center of Canada in regards to geography and also cancer and firefighting. The first legislation of its kind in Canada, where the government finally said, enough's enough, we have the science, and we're going to create legislation that's going to recognize the link between occupational cancer and firefighting. It treated occupational cancer in the same way as a death or injury on the fire ground. And what this said is that if a firefighter was to die on a fire ground, let's say a firefighter goes into a building trying to rescue a child and he falls through the floor and dies, there would be certain compensation and support that flowed through that accident and death. But for now, cancer is treated in the exact same way. There is no difference between an online or on-scene tragic death and an occupational cancer death. And we don't treat it any differently. And that in itself was a challenge in many cases, not only for the politicians to grasp, but also firefighters, because there was an educational element there as well. And I just want to talk about WCB. And I've looked at the Danish system. It's very similar. All the rules of how claims get covered are very similar to what it was prior to 2002 in Canada. What we saw was that we had tremendous studies, we had tremendous evidence, but it was impossible for us to prove our case at that level. So we had to show that the workers' compensation system was broken, like it's broken today in Denmark. It does not work for our occupation, because the way it worked is that you had to conclusively show where you got injured. Well, that's impossible, because it's not one fire that is hurting us. It's not two, it's hundreds of fire over our career, and we can show that over the longevity of a career, it breaks down the cell process within our bodies, we become more susceptible to cancer, and thus, that's why you're seeing the higher rates of cancer in firefighters. So what the legislation did is it created a rebuttable presumption that said that if a firefighter worked X number of years, they were going to bypass the workers' compensation system and it was going to be an automatic coverage for that firefighter. So it took it out of the hands of workers' compensation because it wasn't working for us. And it was given to a certain objective standard, saying that if a firefighter had worked X number of years and he was going to be deemed one of these specific cancers that were named by science, then what would happen is that firefighter would be covered automatically. And we were the only profession to have that. Why were we the only profession? Because we were the only profession that goes into an uncontrolled environment where we know we will come into contact with carcinogens and we will be exposed. There's no protecting us. Okay? Prior to 2002, we had over 100 claims in Winnipeg alone. Winnipeg is a city of about 1 million people, the greater Winnipeg area. We had over 100 claims that we had put forward. We had a great registry. We could show that some of these firefighters had been in fires, up to 500 fires in their career. And now they had occupational cancer and they were turned down. Every one. After this legislation was passed, I can now say that there's been over 100 successful claims that have been filed in one city in Canada. What this legislation then did is it went across Canada. It went across Canada. Now 90% of firefighters in Canada are covered, and close to 40 states in the United States now have presumptive legislation. And many of those, all of the jurisdictions in Canada and many in the United States are based on the Manitoba Canadian model. And in every one of these jurisdictions I've been into in Canada and the United States, we had to have a battle. We had to have a battle with the workers' compensation. Whatever it was, a workers' compensation insurance board or workers' compensation bureaucrats, we had to have a battle because we had to take the power from them, because their present system was failing firefighters. They weren't supporting us in what was killing us, because now we were finding that firefighters were dying at not only 1.5 to 2 times, but some studies actually suggest 3 to 4 times the level of the general population, and it was getting worse. So what happens then is that I go to Australia, and I'm brought in by the Australian government and the union. They bring me in as a joint to make a presentation to the leadership of Australia. And prior to 2010, they were just like Manitoba, just like you are now. No claims were being accepted. It was the same type of system that was in Denmark, Canada, and the United States. They had certain rules they had to go through, and that's why every claim was being denied. So we went to Australia, and what happened was it was a stunning success. Within 2 years, The federal government of Australia actually did a Senate report that says we need to get to the bottom of this. Why are firefighters dying at such a level, and why hasn't there been one Australian firefighter that has been covered by occupational cancer? Are we failing these people? Are we failing the firefighters who literally give their lives for their country and their municipalities? So they did an Australian Senate report. And I hope that each one of you will read that report. It is a book. It was over 6 months. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. They brought in all the experts around the world. They looked at all the science as of 2010. And what the Australian Senate report said unanimously of all parties, because every party was represented on this Senate report, that it was wrong. Firefighters in Australia were dying and they were being ignored by their government. So they passed legislation based on the Manitoba model. And now all of Australia is now covered federally under the same laws that Canada has and many jurisdictions in the United States. And as well, we're also seeing improvements on this in such states as Western Australia, Southern Australia, Tasmania, Victoria, Queensland. So Australia now is like Canada. 90% of the firefighters are now being protected under presumptive legislative laws that recognizes the link between occupational cancer and firefighters. And firefighters are now being able to get support. As I said, 90% of the firefighters in Canada and Australia now have coverage. 40 states, you're looking at close to 1 million firefighters are now being covered for some type of occupational cancer if they are diagnosed. What's happened too is that because of the work that we've done in Canada, the United States, and Australia, it became a world issue. So the World Health Organization assigned IARC, its international arm that deals with the Agency for Research on Cancer, and they looked at this. And IARC reiterated what we had said for years. First of all, it was the first time they looked at cancer in firefighting. They said, firefighters, every single fire they're going into has a connection to carcinogens. They actually listed at least 6 Class 1 carcinogens that are known carcinogens, and over 20 other Class 2 and Class 2A and 2B carcinogens that at almost every single fire, firefighters will come in contact with. This put the firefighting issue on the world map, because what IARC said is that there still needs to be more research, because this is the first time we've really looked at this. And they said that they're going to put the firefighters within the classification system. But what's happened is since that time, we now have new studies that show a stronger connection. So what's going to happen within the next year or two is IARC is going to look at these firefighting again, and what's going to happen is they're going to have an even stronger connection between firefighting and occupational cancer, because the scientists are learning more. How are they learning more? Each study is another piece of the puzzle that's going into that puzzle. That puzzle is almost totally complete right now. So now you see studies such as LeMaster's. Biggest study at the time, over 100,000 firefighters looking at over 32 studies, conclusive link to cancer. Giudice, Manitoba, in 2002, looked at the whole array of cancers and listed the number of cancers that the province of Manitoba used within their legislation. That was based from Manitoba, then it went to Alberta, right across Canada. The Korean study, just to show the breadth of these studies, is it's not just North America or Australia, but there's also studies as far from Korea. Again, they compared firefighters to police officers to EMS workers. Firefighters had an unbelievably high cancer rate. The Nordic study, I'm not going to go into that, but the Nordic study also said that there's a cancer incidence among Nordic firefighters in 2013. They're now doing further studies on this. The Monash University study out of Australia. I had the great honor of being a scientific advisor on this study. And the reason that they asked me to be on there, because this was the largest study ever done for firefighters. It looked at over 150,000 firefighters in Australia from 1940 to the present. It looked at every type of firefighters, wildland, volunteer, full-time, urban, professional, and basically Australia has a very good cancer registry as well. So we were able to identify the cancers in the different groups. And what it said is it reiterated exactly what the previous studies had said, The overall rate of cancer had expanded for firefighters, even though the overall mortality of firefighters are lower than the general population. That's what's called the healthy worker effect, which I'll talk about in a second. But so if you take cancer out of the equation, firefighters live longer than the general population. But if you add cancer to the equation, firefighters now have had anywhere from 1.5 to 2 times the risk level. And you have to remember, because that risk level is underestimated because of certain things called the healthy worker effect. But I'll talk about the healthy worker effect in a second, because it's very important for you to understand, because that goes to the heart of our danger as firefighters. The NIOSH study, 30,000 firefighters in Philadelphia, Chicago, San Francisco. Again, overall incidence of cancer was very high for firefighters compared to the general population. Science is a big puzzle. Science is extremely conservative. Why is there still issues in science? Because science takes a long time to come to a conclusive element. If a classic example is smoking and lung cancer. Society knew 20 years before science was conclusive that there was a connection between smoking and cancer. Why? Because science is so conservative, and science, to have a conclusive statistical connection between firefighting and cancer, you have to have a 95% certainty level. So if the study comes forward and it says that there's an 80% chance that that firefighter got that cancer from their job, it would not be statistically significant, it would be ignored. But we know in society, we don't operate like that. And that's what the politicians in Australia said, is they said, there may be some issues with the science. There may be some issues with that every single study does not say every single cancer is connected to firefighting, but overall, there is an excess of cancer. So what happens is they acknowledge the fact of the high level of cancer, especially when you look at the issues of firefighting, because we're a very small part of the population. Because of sample size, even a sample size of 30,000 firefighters, you have to have an extremely high rate of cancer to be statistically significant. Because the smaller the sample size, the higher it is to hit that maximum 95% certainty. And I know that's very complicated, but that's what we've had to do as firefighters. We've had to learn the legalities of the WCB system. We've had to become experts in statistical analysis and epidemiological studies, and that's how we are able to convince politicians that we need support now. Firefighters do have a higher rate of certain cancers. We get it from the higher rate than the general population. And what the Australian study showed, because it was such a large study for the first time, is the longer you work as a firefighter, the higher risk of your cancer. And it makes sense because you start off healthy and literally you give up your life fighting fires because of every single fire you're coming in contact. We've done studies in the United States that have showed that every single fire we go into, even if it's a minor fire, we're going to come in contact with benzene, formaldehyde, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, the soot. Every single fire we come in contact. Firefighters come into contact with dozens of IARC Class 1, Class 2A, 2B chemicals. IARC talks about that. They say there is no dispute. Firefighters will come in contact with these chemicals every single fire. And not just one, not just two, but dozens. Fires are more dangerous today than ever before due to an increased use of plastics. This is an important thing to understand because no matter what your prevention is, we take presumptive legislation very seriously, so we do everything we can in North America. We have wellness fitness, we have early detection, we have all sorts of elements that allow us to detect cancer earlier. But what happens is that even though we're doing all these health and safety issues forward, the dangers at the job are raising. So even though the health safety factor will be minimized by 10%, the toxicity level of fires may have increased 100 times what it was even 10 or 15 years ago because of the use of plastics. The use of plastics, even just going back 10 years ago, there's no such thing as wood-based construction anymore. Many of the construction elements deal with composite, glue-based, etc. The building materials, electronics. We're being inundated with new electronics every single day. Those are some of the most toxic things that when there's a fire in a house, those things are going to be the first things to burn. Those are going to be the TVs, the computers, etc. Flame retardants. In the United States, we've just done studies to show that the very thing that was supposed to minimize fires are killing firefighters. Flame retardants were put forward by the chemical companies to coat everything. Everything from couches to housing products to children's clothing. Flame retardants were put on there. Well, the studies now show that those flame retardants really do not stop the fire from progressing like they thought. But one thing it does do is when the fire progresses, those flame retardants turn into benzenes, turn into cyanides, dioxins, furans, and it makes our work environment even more toxic. And the new chemical combinations are happening every single year because China's putting 12 to 14 new chemicals on the market every single year. We don't even have, the World Organization does not even have the ability to test these products before they go on because there's such a thirst for Chinese products. They want them cheap, and they're figuring out cheaper ways to make plastics. Plastics and fire retardants. There's an HBO special. It's a channel in the United States, and it won a international award. It was called Toxic Hot Seat, where it said that flame retardants are actually killing firefighters at an alarming rate. The longer you work as a firefighter, the more your cancer risk increases. And chemicals combine what's called the synergetic effect, the synergy. So 1 + 1 is not 4 on the toxicity level. Or 1 + 1 is not 2 on the toxicity level, it is 4. So if you have 6 chemicals in there, 1 + 1 + 1, all the way to 6, it may increase the toxicity level 100 times because you combine benzene with formaldehyde, with polycyclic acids, with the dioxins, the furans. These all combine to become even a greater toxic soup of death of firefighters that we're going into. We cannot protect ourselves from this danger. Our firefighting clothing protects us from ambient heat, but not from contact with chemicals that are cancer-causing. What that says is that's why we're different from other organizations, other unions, other working, is because our environment, we know we're going into a dangerous environment, and we do not have the protective equipment to protect us. Our protective equipment is the best in the world, and I've been to stations in Denmark, I've been to stations in Stockholm, Finland. Every place has very good quality turnout gear, we call it, or firefighting gear. That gear is made to protect us upwards of 1,000 degrees Celsius. It's made to protect us from ambient heat, but it has to be able to breathe, to release the heat, or else firefighters would literally die in fires from heat issues. And even more is that every one of the areas of entrance areas, such as your cuffs, your neck, your crotch, where you do up your pants, that's where the carcinogens are coming in at the highest level. So we know that we're going in there and that we're going to be exposed and we're going to be absorbing. And when we absorb those carcinogens, and I have a study I'm going to show you here in a second that shows conclusively how these carcinogens get through our gear and get on our skin, and over time breaks down our cells, gives us cancer, and kills us. The particulate infiltration study. This was a study we did with the U.S. government and the Department of National Defense, the International Association of Firefighters, and the Department of Defense of the United States. We did a particulate infiltration study. And what this infiltration study did is it was with the Research Triangle Institute, and it was a real game changer, because we always knew that the gear, that when we fought a fire, let's say we were to fight a fire on a Saturday. We would fight a fire on a Saturday, and we would wash, and the water would be black. And you could smell the carcinogens coming off your body. Well, we would go home, and 2 or 3 days later, without fighting a fire, we would go have a shower again. And you'd notice that the water was still black. The carcinogens were coming out of our pores. Right? And every single firefighter knows that. Right? But to explain that is really quite astounding, that People say that you literally have to take that home. We literally take that in our bodies for our careers. The tests were done as per the Department of Defense. And what we did is we looked at a type of a fluorescent aerosol that mimicked the particles of cancer-causing agents. So they're the same size, the same type of aspect, but it was silica powder. And what this silica powder does is it gets on the skin, and afterwards you can detect it. Because under a black light, you're able to find out exactly where that particles got into the gear. So the subjects wore turnout gear in a particulate-laden chamber. It was silica powder, the same infiltration pattern as cancer-causing carcinogens. So what happened is we put these individuals, and it wasn't even in a real fire situation. We tightened up the gear. We made sure that they were completely sealed, hoping that we would keep the particles outside. They went in there, they did some basic firefighting moves. They put up a ladder, they did some chopping with an axe. And what happened was afterwards, we told them to take their clothes off, and we put them under sensitive black lights to expose if any particulates had made it through the system. The particulates were seen throughout the inside of the gear. Particulates were highest around the face, neck, and crotch. And as we heard, that's the most dangerous place for firefighters to get particulates because that's the highest rate of absorption of the body in those particular areas. The head, the face, the neck, the crotch. So this is an example of where it is. This is the particulates, so they're in there for about 15 to 20 minutes, just like a fire, as if we fought a fire and we're coming out. Okay, so that's the firefighter coming in. So afterwards, we took the firefighter out, and you can see all around the face white areas, that's silica powder. And you see it the highest around the neck and jaw area, because that's where the interface is. That's where you see partitions in the gear. You see it around the ear, you see it around the neck. This is how the particles got through the gear. And you even see it on the body, you see it on the chest, you see it on the hands especially, right? Like that's even with wearing gloves. The silica powder actually got in because they never took the gloves off during this whole time. You see throughout the crotch. You can see where the boots were, where the boots come up, and the gear, you can see the high areas of the silica powder covering their bodies, especially in the crotch area. So it shows the pathways for carcinogens to come on our body. We know that there's carcinogens. We know that there's a need for hygiene, clothing, turnout gear maintained. But one thing that is really important to assess is that when we go into a fire, it's not a normal situation. Our skin temperature can rise anywhere from 2 to 3 degrees. And that may not sound like a lot, but by our skin temperature rising by 2 to 3 degrees, it actually increases the absorbability of our skin by 200 times. So our skin becomes more permeable when our skin temperature has risen. It becomes more permeable so that it goes into our body, and what we see is that it goes into our body, and over time, this causes cancer. And if you look at the studies that have come out in the last number of years, the real sophisticated studies, we're seeing some of the highest rates of cancer is the filters of the body, the skin cancer, the blood cancers, the kidneys, the liver cancers, the bladder cancers, the brain cancer, because there's such a great blood flow. We're seeing very, very high rates. So it's not necessarily the breathing that's killing us. It's more that we're finding it's the absorption. And that absorption level is not going to stop anytime soon because we have not invented a type of gear yet that can minimize this. Again, it's strongest in the neck, jaw, face, and crotch. That's where the highest levels of the silica powder was found. 2 to 4 times. At 2 degrees, your skin becomes 200 times more permeable. At 4 degrees of skin temperature, it's 400 times. The healthy worker effect. This is why it's so frightening, is that our rates of cancer, every study comes out that says that firefighters should be 20 to 30% less chance of getting cancer than the general population. There's reasons for that. One is we enter the workforce in the top 10 percentile of physical fitness. Secondly, every firefighter has to go through a screening process to get on. They have to go to medicals. So you're going to screen out people with cancer already. And as well, one of the things that was very surprising is almost every country in the world, we see a much lower rate of smoking than the general population. Firefighters tend to be healthier, they tend to eat better, and they're less smokers. Matter of fact, in my department since 1989, we do not hire firefighters who smoke. If you smoke, you can be disavowed from the process because of the risk of firefighting cancer. You do not need to add firefighting onto smoking. It just increases your risk factors. Presumptive legislation is the key. It's the key to make sure that firefighters are given proper benefits, proper compensation, and it treats cancer deaths as line of duty deaths. It's not a new idea. I'm going to tell you something. People say, well, this is quite a radical idea. Where did you guys get the idea from in Manitoba? I got it from 1700 England. Percival Potts. Percival Potts was the first scientist in the world to identify the connection between soot and cancer. This is in the mid-1700s. And what he did is he studied chimney sweeps. He had none of the fantastic scientific measures that they had then. But what was happening in 17th century England, that there was a massive number of 5- and 6-year-old children were dying of scrotum and testicular cancer. So the British government brought this scientist in, and I've read his papers. And it's amazing to show how common sense it really is. Soot, we know soot to be polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, the carriers of the benzene and stuff. So what happens is you see the children. These children were 5 and 6 years old, and they would be put down chimneys without clothes, because clothes were very expensive, and they were dirty, they would have to wash them. So these children would go down, and within a couple of years of working in this environment, they would be dying of scrotum cancer. Horrible deaths, and at alarming rates. What happened was his work created the first presumptive legislation in the world. It created the Chimney Sweeper Act of 1786. Within this act, it's what we basically copied in Manitoba. We said that the government's acknowledging there's a risk between chimney sweeps and occupational cancer, especially scrotum cancer. So they said, we're going to change this. So 17th century England says that they're going to create a presumptive legislation, creating laws that children could no longer be chimney sweeps until they were 8 years old. And secondly, they had to have clothes. You had to provide clothing and the basics for these children. So, but this resulted in this, and this was an important result because just a few years later, there was studies that came through Germany, and the German chimney sweeps actually wore clothes when they were there, the children, and their rates of cancer were much less. So it's just the reason I do this is because it shows how common sense it is. Firefighters are today's chimney sweeps. We're going down those chimneys, and we're dying of cancer. And that's why we need politicians to come out. It's common sense. Every jurisdiction in the world has come out with legislation saying that you can't smoke in public anymore because it's too dangerous to the workers. It's too dangerous for the waiters and waitresses in bars to be able to smoke inside. Well, that secondhand smoke is probably, like our work environment is probably 100 times more toxic than secondhand smoke. So what we're asking for, and that's why when I go to every government of the world and the issues put forward, it's usually unanimous. The government say, yes, enough's enough, we're going to provide firefighters with coverage, and it's going to occur. And the presumptive legislation allows for a legal onus that says employees no longer have to prove which fire they got their cancer. All they have to prove is they got cancer while working as a firefighter over a number of years, and they would be covered. And one of the things the presumptive legislation does is it moves employers to be more proactive in preventing this, because now they have a financial duty to prevent the cancers so that their bottom line is not going to be hurt. That's why if you look at Chief Locke's material, even though they have presumptive legislation, Their workers' compensation costs did not increase. Why? Because they instituted programs, wellness, fitness, that actually lowered other elements of their compensation package to compensate for the cost. So the overall costs become negligible, simply because of a preventative aspect. Because when you do health and wellness prevention, like they have in Edmonton and Winnipeg and across Canada and the United States, you actually lower. There's studies that we have that says for every dollar you invest in workers' health, you're going to get $2 back in less sick time, less workers' compensation, etc. The presumptive legislation allows us to create protocols where cancer risks can be minimized wherever we can. I can tell you that anecdotal medical, almost every single place I go to, and it's no different here, I've met many firefighters with cancer, and I talk to their doctors. Many of the doctors say that, you know what, for some reason firefighters, the cancers hit them younger than the general population, and usually the cancer is much more aggressive and metastasizes quicker because their body is more susceptible. And the doctors have told me this. Not just one, not just two, but probably over a half dozen doctors have said they even have a different treatment mechanism for firefighters compared to the general population because the cancer is so aggressive. Our workplace is killing us. We have no way to fully protect ourselves, and the situation is getting worse. Governments and politicians need to admit there's a problem. Because we can't do anything unless we admit there's a connection between firefighting and cancer. That's the first step. I just want to, I know there's a number of firefighters who have cancer here, or have firefighters who have known firefighters who have died of occupational cancer. Could you, I know it's a very private thing, but could you please just stand up for a second? Just the number of firefighters. I just want to say that this presentation is being done in memory of the many firefighters who have died of occupational cancer with no support or acknowledgement from their political leaders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Martins, for your responses. Before we are going to hand over the questions to Alex, we'll do a little bit of change because Lislov Next, our chairman for the Committee of Health, has to leave for Department of Health. There will be some negotiations. So right now, before the questions, I'll hand over the word to Lislov Next to do some concluding remarks and tell how busy she will be dealing with this issue, most important issue. Så det er så Lislov Next nogle forledsagen, fordi hun skal indkalde til forhandlinger i Sundhedsministeriet, men inden så Next forlader os, så vil hun gerne lige ridse op, hvad hun har fået ud af dagen, og hvad hun vil tage med i bagagen i forhold til Sundhedsudvalget og Sundhedsministeren fremadrettet. Jeg er ikke tvivl om, at jo flere man faktisk indkalder til, desto mere arbejde for dem, så du bliver selv om det. Men værsgo, råd dit.
Jeg synes jo, det er pragtfuldt, fordi det gør, at man bliver mere klar over, hvad er det, der skal til. Hvad er det, der skal til i nordisk sammenhæng, og hvad er det, der skal til i den danske lovgivning, for at vi kommer derhen, hvor vi får løftet forholdene for vores brandmænd. I forhold til de forskellige oplægshold, der har været med, Tommy fortalte jo, at det her det har jo heller ikke bare noget med de farlige stoffer at gøre. Det har eksempelvis også noget med arbejdsmiljøet. Det kan være natarbejde, det kan være, at man bliver stresset på arbejde, fysisk og psykisk. Det er udrustning, indretning, og det er i hvert fald noget af det, vi kan gøre noget ved. Noget af det er op til brandmanden selv, og der har vi brug for information, men vi har også brug for, at vi går ind politisk og kigger på, er der nogle ting, vi kan gøre til lovkrav. Der blev talt om, at det her med, hvordan man vasker tøjet, det kunne jo være en del af et lovkrav, hvordan der skulle se ud på en station. Det er i hvert fald noget af det, som jeg tager med mig som nogle af dem, man kan lave noget på kortsigtet løsning. Vi har kunnet se, hvordan forholdene er i forhold til de ting, der brænder, hvad der er farligt og hvordan det er farligt for den enkelte. Og jeg tror sagtens, at vi sammen i starten her, vi taler op i Nordisk Råd, hvor vi netop, som også der var en, der foreslog, prøver at samle de forskningsresultater, der ligger i de nordiske lande, fordi det kan jeg jo forstå, at der ligger en hel del. Og der vil vi i hvert fald foreslå fra vores nordisk frihedsgruppe, foreslår at vi får samlet de her til en rapport, fordi så er det noget, vi kan bruge i vores respektive lande og se, jamen, hvordan kan vi gøre forholdene bedre. Der er også nogle ting, som vi hver især kan tage op i vores eget land, og det er da noget af det, som jeg vil arbejde videre på. Det er også at se på, jamen, hvad er den kanadiske lovgivning for eksempel. Se på, hvordan man kan oversætte det til noget dansk lovgivning. Hvad er lade sig gørligt, og hvad er ikke? Hvad skal der til? Hvad har vi ikke? Hvad kan vi gøre kortsigtet, og hvad kan vi gøre langsigtet? Så det er i hvert fald det, jeg har fået ud af det, det er, at vi får samlet den information og viden, vi har. Og grunden til, at man også som politiker går videre, det er jo fordi, man får en viden, der gør, at man tænker, at det her det er noget, der skal gøres noget med. Men jeg vil sige rigtig mange tak for dagen i dag. Jeg synes, det har været rigtig, rigtig spændende. Og jeg giver ordet videre til Ari, som også sidder i Nordisk Frihed. Så der også lige kommer en kommentar fra hans side. Og så vil jeg haste over til en sundhedsminister, som vi går i gang med forhandlinger, som er uden bagkant, så det kan være til midnat, før det er færdigt. Yeah.
Sorry, just 1 second. We have a process within our fire service in North America, is that every firefighter carries what's called a challenge coin. And it's got, on one side it has the emblem of the Maltese cross, and it says honor, courage, and integrity and tradition. And it's something that we give to people as firefighters to say, don't forget where you come from. This is what firefighting is all about, the tradition, the integrity, and the sacrifice. So I'd like to present you with your battle that you need to have in the future on this issue. I hope you carry this point with you always, and remember all the firefighters that stood up here today that have been fighting for that.
I will. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Few of you know that I'm also a member of this group, and we have worked together with Liesel a few years, and it has been so wonderful to see how intensively she is working this way. Thank you. I'm a member of Finnish Parliament, but I'm also fireman, so I understand truly this what's happening. And if I can say that it's not only firemen who work with this to get this right. And there's a lot of politics who understand this problem. Liesel and I, we are just two of us, but still there's a lot of politics who don't understand this problem, how big it is. So, because I'm fireman, I know answer before I ask. And I ask now you for support us in our work, because knowing these things it's necessary to get through this all and all over the world after all. So thank you that you helped us.
Mange tak, Ari. Så fik vi både nogle konkluderende bemærkninger fra Dansk Folkeparti og fra ARC, fra de sande finder, fra Nordisk Råd og Brug, der hedder Nordisk Frihed. Jeg anbefaler, at vi tager lige et par spørgsmål til Alex, og så derefter, hvad der ikke fremgår af programmet, men som jeg har indført der, så tager vi lige bagefter 10 minutters pause, inden vi går over til paneldiskussion. Så hvem agter at lægge ud? Værsgo derovre. Du skal ind på mikrofonen.
Det gør jeg. Hej, er det for tæt på? Ja. Jeg hedder Martin. Jeg er brandmester i specialtjenesten i Københavns Brandvæsen, og så er jeg som indsatsleder i Stevns Brandvæsen, og har været brandmand i 26 år efter. Jeg har et spørgsmål. Nu har vi nævnt, har hørt om tidligere omkring det her med personlig hygiejne, med vigtigheden af at vaske sig, bade og bruge sauna. Og det er ligesom en del af min, brandmands barnelærdom, at man vasker sig, og man går i sauna efterfølgende for at svede de her partikler væk. Det var længe inden det blev farligt at være brandmand på den måde. Der vidste man alligevel, at man skulle svede det ud. Men så nævner du, at hvis vores hudtemperatur stiger bare med 2 grader, så øges optagelsen af de her stoffer ganske betragteligt. Og det kan jeg ikke få til at hænge sammen med ideen i at gå i sauna. Så virker det som om det har en modsat effekt på mig. Jeg ved ikke, om du kan hjælpe med det. Så.
Alex?
Yeah, the issue of the sauna is very, very big. Oh, sorry.
The issue of the sauna is very, the issue of the sauna is very big in the Nordic countries. And one of the finds that it does seem to assist in getting the carcinogens out of your body. So I believe it's a situation where the more you sweat, the more it's going to remove it. But it also, but in a sauna process, there's a washing process as well. It's not going to stay on your skin. It's going to come out of your body. You're going to take it off almost immediately. That's how I understand a sauna. And there has been studies to suggest that saunas are very assisting in getting carcinogens and other elements out of your body that are detrimental. But that is an interesting point, is that the heat actually increases your absorbability rate. So it'd be very interesting to see exactly how that impacts if you had did specific studies. The sauna is not really a big issue in Canada and the United States and Australia. We don't use saunas. So what happens is that when we go back, we have extensive cleaning processes at the fire scene. We have cleaning processes at the fire hall. We are not allowed to take our gear home, our clothes. We are not allowed to wash our clothes in our family clothes washer. So we try to minimize the contact. But the saunas really haven't been an issue in Canada and the United States, whether it's a positive or a negative. There hasn't been that many studies on it. I wish I had an answer for it.
Var det et svar på spørgsmålet? Nu har vi jo en del finder her, men jeg tror godt, at jeg uden deres involvering kan fortælle, at Finland er et stort spørgsmål, en stor ting i den finske kultur. Hvem vil så at følge op? Jeg tænker på, Lars, har du bemærkning til, at samler med udlæsning og så videre, så det er jo dit område, kan man sige.
Nu er det ikke lige mit område med lige præcis det med, hvad skal man sige, udvaskning i samler, men sådan lavpraktisk, så vil jeg sige, at det både er godt og skidt. Jeg tror, det gode, det er også det, som Alex siger, at det damptryk, der bliver dannet, det vil jo lige nu og her presse noget vand ud og noget skidt ud, partikler ud, som så bliver vasket væk, som du siger, Alex. Men samtidig med åbner det selvfølgelig også den mulighed, at den restmængde af snavs, eller af giftige partikler, der er inde i epidermis, altså inde i huden, at den har mulighed for at trække længere ind. Så det er både godt og skidt, vil jeg sige sådan umiddelbart, uden jeg har forsket i det i øvrigt. Jeg har forsket i det med transport af nogle kemikalier, hvor det ikke er nogle sauna. Så derfor kan jeg ikke bare sige, hvordan det er. Det er bare sådan en
Og så får Ari selv ordet.
As a Finnish fireman, maybe I can try to answer.
I'm not science, so I don't know science way, but as I have worked fireman since a professional fireman since '95, there's of course you go shower after fire, and you wash the dirty of your skin, and you think you're clean. But after when you going to sauna and you're sweating it out, you are again, you're dirty. And when you come to the shower again, it's dirty again, water. So it's working. I don't know how it's working, but I think that in every fire station should be sauna.
Tommy?
Yeah, there's actually one study that shows that some chemicals are removed from the body in sauna. Of course, you have to shower first, and not with a scrub or anything to damage your skin. Just a plain douche. Then you go into the sauna, and then you will open up your pores. I mean, the carcinogens are getting into your body when your pores are open. So you have to open them again to get rid of the filth. And this study shows that it doesn't get rid of everything, but it does get rid of something. I was just looking for the study. I thought I brought it with me, but I have it at home. I can send it to you if you like. So it removes something, but not everything.
Tak for det. Flere spørgsmål i salen? Mathias?
I'm getting nervous on my own behalf because I was drafted as a firefighter for 6 months in 2003 and 2004 in the Danish management agency. So instead of going to the military, I was a firefighter. I thought about, okay, I can learn how to kill people, or learn how to rescue people, and I thought rescue people was the thing for me. It was only for 6 months. I did a lot of training in these fire houses that we just have seen an extensive criticism of from Finland. But if I get cancer, will it then be recognized as occupational cancer based on 6 months as a firefighter?
In Canada, no, it wouldn't. The minimum timeline for many of the cancers is between 5 to 10 years. You had to work consistent for at least 5 to 10 years, because that's when you see the science showing a doubling of risk. For some of the cancers that have a very high latency, like colon and prostate, it's upwards of 20 years you have to work as a firefighter, because colon and prostate is really an older person's cancer. So you have to work that much longer in that type of environment so that the cancer, but that's what we find is that after 20 years, we were having firefighters with prostate cancer, where normally you would find prostate more in their 50s and 60s, where we were fighting prostate cancer in the early 40s of firefighters that started when they were 20 years old. But 6 months, unless you had a major exposure, I think you're safe.
So cause of death will actually be because of something else. Yes. Final question? Sidste spørgsmål? That seems not to be the case. So again, Alex, thank you so very much.